So I'll start just by saying how great it is to be here. This is absolutely a wonderful event. I've already met a ton of people I want to keep in touch with. So thank you for the people who made this happen. Just very briefly, a little bit about me. My education is interesting. I did a humanities degree and a comp sci degree, and then I after a few years did a startup. Grew it for 7 years with some amazing co-founders. Sold it, stayed on post-acquisition through all kinds of crazy M&A and expansion and contraction and building sales and marketing teams. And then I joined Hootsuite as employee 40 in 2011. And we've since 20x'd that. We've gone as high as 800. We're not quite that big right now. So it's been a pretty fun ride. And I'm going to kind of draw on that humanities and technical background for this talk. This is kind of a history of what the transition from monolith to microservices has looked like at Hootsuite. So the time frame here, well, it is actually true. We have only been building services for 2 years, as Jean-Michel said. It's actually a longer journey than that from when we thought about it. So I'll start by just setting the stage, Hootsuite in 2013, what we look like, and go through kind of 3 arbitrary phases of how that implementation of services has looked. And each one is subsequently shorter, with the first one being the kind of particularly painful 1.5 year long journey to just figure out how the hell do we actually build services. So Hootsuite in 2013, our product, probably a lot of you are familiar with it, web-based social media management dashboard where teams can collaborate on a number of social networks, as well as mobile products. And that's, in essence, that's really all there was in 2013. From a people point of view, I'll give you kind of the graph of people growth over, most of Hootsuite's history were founded kind of before 2011. But you can see here, and this is from a different talk I do where I talk about what each of these different phases are. One sec. Hello? What these different phases are actually like. But as you can see, the kind of steepest part of this graph is 2013 through the beginning of 2015 was absolutely nuts. And I need to set the stage that that's the same time that we were doing most of our transition to services. So pretty chaotic to begin with. Technology and architecture-wise, in 2013, it was just a big red monolith. There were about 120,000 lines of mostly PHP code. I know the JavaScript people on my team would kill me for not paying more attention to that, but it really, on the server side, was mostly PHP. And we were a LAMP stack, horizontally scaled on Amazon, with a MySQL backend and various web servers over time at the front end, and load balancers in front of them. And then tons of performance enhancing drugs, like stuff to just make it scale. So we had Varnish for content. We had Amazon CloudFront for international distribution over CDN. We had Gearman to kind of make PHP think it's a parallel capable language. We had Memcache to protect our MySQL layer from too many reads. We had Redis for things where there's too much volatility in the data that you can't use Memcache. And then we had Mongo for the things where there's just crazy volume of writes. So great. This actually kind of makes a LAMP stack feel like a distributed system. Wonderful. Until it's not, because at some point, each of these things becomes a single point of failure. And we absolutely hit that, where our customer activity volume was just growing at such a rate that one by one, these things started breaking down. And it was painful, very painful. So to kind of underscore the pain, this is our availability in 2013. 2 nines, almost 3, not quite, and that's about 70 minutes of downtime a month, give or take. So very noticeable to customers. And though this was never directly, bean counted, the number we bandied about was that's about $1 million an hour of downtime. So that's pretty expensive. If you just multiply that, it's 14 million in a year or something like that. And we had customers who had this SLA of 3 nines who came to us and said, hey, here's our contract, here's the SLA, we want some money back. And we had to give it to them. So something really needed to be done badly. So we thought, okay, well, we'll move to services. Really, what we were doing was just putting out fires for that first 18 months. So the goal was to increase uptime, reduce failure rate. And just kind of continuing a thread that's already been raised a lot here today around organizational structure. At the time, we were structured as project teams. So we had this big pool of development team members who would kind of form these project teams to take on specific pieces of product work out of our backlog, which will have consequences for later. We really only added 3 services, 1 in production, 2 kind of in production at this time, but we added a ton of redundancy to a lot of those single points of failure. Kind of getting pretty technical, but we developed our own in-house protocol on top of ZeroMQ called VIP, which stands for Volt Interchange Protocol. Our language of choice for service building was Scala, and our development rate was 0.16 services per month. So pretty sad. I mean, I will say there was not a lot of people actually building services. It was, again, mostly people putting out fires. What does that look like from the kind of code growth point of view? The left axis, unfortunately, is not showing well, but that's about roughly 10,000 total lines of code. These are the 3 different services that we built. For those in the back, the x-axis goes from the beginning of 2013 all the way to present day. So that gives you a rough sense of time scale. And you can see this pink service, that's the one that we got into production. And it was what it did was it handled our member record management, essentially, thousands of requests per second, took a ton of load off the PHP server, which let us then go in and remove single points of failure from a whole bunch of other points. But to put that in context, this is the monolith code growth. So again, it's a shame you can't see the left axis, but on the left axis, that goes from about 115,000 lines of code up to about 160. So putting those 2 things together, you get this. So in 18 months, we've kind of not really even made a dent. So problems for that first period were we were slow, and I would, being our own worst critic, I would contend it's because we started too late on this shift. We were somebody said about technical debt. If you don't, it's like a real debt. You have to go bankrupt at some point. Another way I like to put it is that you go from technical debt to technical deficit, where to service the debt, you need so much people power. The match of project teams and service building really wasn't a very good fit. The way we originally conceived of things, we thought, okay, well, we'll build these services with these brand new shiny APIs, and then we'll do this big grand migration and cut over. We did, and that worked, but that meant we had, wherever a service was called from anywhere in our code base, we now had to have 2 code paths, one that called the service and one that called the old code, and then we had to kind of slowly move the needle from one to the other. Super expensive, so we found a better way subsequently. And customer value, all the customers got out of this was better availability, which from an engineering team's point of view is great. From a business point of view is, well, that's supposed to be the minimum you give us anyways, so we don't like it. Politely stated. So solutions to those problems on the velocity is really prioritizing what's broken, so changing our mindset from we're going to be a solo organization to no, we got to pay down technical debt. And then restructuring our organization to stable teams instead of project teams. And solving that problem of having two code paths everywhere where you want to use a service or an existing code base by using a technique called service-oriented monolith, where you essentially you put an API facade on your own existing code base that just calls back into itself and then also can call out to the service. So that just having that, basically putting the service API into the monolith ended up being a huge time savings over time. And the customer value piece has been alluded to is you just have to kind of say, okay, well, we're going to allocate this much effort to building services, this much to technical debt, and this much to features, because you can never stop doing the customer value. 2014 availability, things got a little better. Let's check time here. Things got a little better. So now we're up to 3 nines. We're over our SLA. Still getting a lot of complaints. You know, I don't think we ever reached like Twitter fail whale status, but there were some tense moments there in 2013 for sure. So things started getting a lot better in 2014, but still a very long way to go. We have this internal target of 4 nines. So phase 2, I would say, is when we actually started building services, even though we're pretending to for 18 months before that. The problem was that we're doing it under this huge, massive structure that's already built. So the goal of this phase 2 is to reduce technical debt, using multiple stable teams, and just to give a sense of the type of services that we built in this time, it's really block and tackle for having a really highly scalable software application in the cloud. So we rebuilt our hourly link shortening product. We built a proper session service, a unified messaging service, so that when we send and consume social media content, it's all going through one service instead of a whole bunch of code paths that might be doing different things in different places. Other ones that aren't on here are things like cryptographic service, block and tackle, as I said. And having this service-oriented monolith approach where the API facade was on the monolith was a huge win. Still using Scala, and our rate of service development kind of 4x'd roughly to 0.78 a month, 11 services in 14 months, not bad. So what did this look like code-wise? Again, verbalizing the y-axis. The top of the y-axis here is 100,000 lines of code roughly. So there's 11 services. You can see each service is a different color, and each one, you know, there's nothing huge in here. It's these nice small product teams that are all chipping away, building their service and bolting it back in to be consumed by the monolith. So we're actually getting some really good productivity in here. Our service code growth is about 2x the monolith code growth, but the monolith code growth still growing, because we're still delivering value via new features. Putting those things together, now you can actually see that service development is making a dent in the overall monolith code base. Always problems, always solutions. I was talking about this with somebody at lunch. The velocity was much better, but we had this massive bottleneck around our operations team with a bunch of different services on a bunch of different pieces of infrastructure. Well, the number of requests you have to make to spin this server up, give this permission to this person on this server. Those things scale with the number of services you have. So operations immediately becomes this huge bottleneck because they can't kind of n requests based on n services. The infrastructure lesson, I mean, we've always monitored infrastructure costs very carefully, but we're still kind of horrified at how quickly infrastructure costs grow when you're spinning up one instance for every, or one redundant set of instances for every service you spin up. And lo and behold, we were building more services, we needed more Scala developers, could not hire fast enough. It's not, at the time, it was not a very common skill set. Last was just, we got to the point where the monolith was calling out to enough services that we really got exposed to how much more performant Scala services are than PHP code. So there were enough requests coming into our web servers, generating enough calls out to our services that the responses coming back from the services, not the ones inbound from customers, would actually saturate the web server. So it was not being saturated by PHP execution, it was being saturated by service inbound connections. So solutions for velocity, embedded operations. So me and the VP of operations got together and like, okay, we need to distribute operations team members across all of the different development teams that we have. And this is how we still operate, and it's working really well. Essentially, it compels every sprint or iteration to contemplate the operations work that needs to be done and actually allocate story points or capacity or however you do it to that work. And for infrastructure, containers, they're beautiful things and taking the world by storm, obviously. So we adopted, no big magic there. And this is kind of one that speaks to how do you scale the team. Training became an extremely important thing for us at Hootsuite. So I think in the last 2 years, we've had 6 cohorts of approximately a dozen developers each go through 2 rounds of Scala training. And they've come out the other side and been able to be productive building services where they didn't know a line of Scala code going in. And that, I think the thing to make this work is that you have to have hired very smart people in the first place, not people who know a specific language. And for the technology problem of saturating PHP, the nice thing about services is that you can put circuit breakers anywhere you want, so that if something is getting saturated and responses are not coming back from receiver to sender, then the sender knows, okay, whoa, yeah, I better back off. So that was a technique we used a lot. So availability in 2015, getting better. 3 nines, not 4 nines, but dramatic improvement. We're down to 17 minutes a month, and I can't help myself from just calling out that this was actually, this downtime was mostly this one bad outage we had in December through a botched database upgrade. It was not so much because of our monolith. So finally, in the last 8 months or so, we've gotten to a place where we can actually say, yes, we're delivering customer value on a service-oriented architecture. Almost every team is delivering services, and instead of that kind of boring block and tackle type service stuff, we're now delivering key features and value. So things like workflow within Hootsuite, things like social video publishing, things like having APIs that our customers can use to integrate Hootsuite into their own products. And in terms of languages, we've implemented Go. It turns out that Scala is a really powerful weapon, but you don't need such a big tool for every job. There's lots of cases where something like Go, which is far easier to adopt, can make a service that does the job faster. You get there faster. And now we're up well over building 1 service a month. So this is what the last kind of 9 months looks like. The y-axis peak there is 200,000, so that's about a doubling in 7 months almost. That's the monolith, so it's definitely tapered in its growth, and that's the 2 combined. So great progress in having services code as a bigger portion of the total. Availability in 2016, finally we have made our internal target of 4 nines. Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. Obviously, a lot of people can relate. The current state of things. I'll close with it to make sure. Good. Okay. So just kind of putting those 3 pictures together. I wasn't making up the 3 phases. This is real data. So you can kind of see phase 1, phase 2, and then kind of an acceleration on phase 3. And this is what our services architecture looks like now. I think the takeaway here is that if you can kind of imagine over the past several years, the top one, by the way, is our main is the monolith. You start out having your monolith and then having all these services that are kind of bespoke off your monolith, but then over time you start getting services using services, which creates more of a graph, and that introduces a whole new set of problems. So as this diagram shows, we're kind of going past that line now, which is compelling us to kind of look at a whole new world of problems and solutions. And kind of the customer takeaway or value from all of this is kind of a meta value, is that we can now not just have that one web and mobile product, but we have a whole bunch of other products that have kind of been brought in through acquisition or internal development, all of which can use these services so that we can have an integrated user model, an integrated billing model, which is hugely valuable. Looking back and ahead, so just a few of the big takeaways. I've talked about this. Scala is super powerful. I just got louder there for a second. Okay. Scala is super powerful, but very hard to learn. So use it sparingly. And I love Go. I'm super bullish on Go, because every developer that we put it in front of just knows it after a weekend. Whereas with Scala, they need a 2-week course. Favor existing protocols. So we built our own protocol for inter-service communication, which was fun and great and cool, and it worked. I just don't think we really needed to do that. I think we probably could have used perfectly good HTTP-like protocol and done just fine. Be highly visible. So this one I can't underscore enough. It takes a lot for business stakeholders to give the permission to an engineering team to be able to say, yes, you can go and allocate all of this crazy amount of capacity that would otherwise go to building features and just fix stuff. So the kind of quid pro quo there is that you need to be super visible about what it is you're doing and why it is valuable. Building on a lot of stuff Madzak said, so Conway's Law is something we have applied over and over again at Hootsuite to good effect through kind of probably 4 or 5 org structure changes over the last 5 years. And Conway's Law is that the products that a development organization produces will be a direct reflection of the communication structures within that organization. So however you structure yourself, that's kind of what your products will look like. And anecdotally, at least, I can say that every time we've reorganized, our product has kind of self-reorganized as a consequence. Obvious one, but monitor operating costs very, very closely. It's the thing you don't see that will get you. And we made a good decision probably a year and a half ago, beginning of 2015, to build a message bus, which is basically a pub sub topic place where any service can send a message, have a topic associated with it, and any other service can subscribe to that topic and get all the messages from that service. Hugely valuable, especially as our structure goes from bespoke to more of a graph. And so it does scale. It absolutely, as we've kind of gone through that ongoing growth that I showed in terms of headcount, it has absolutely scaled with team and customer size. There will be more challenges, as there always are. So briefly, service discovery. When you deploy a new service, it needs to be able to register itself to all of the other services in the constellation of services. Ideally, you want to totally automate that. So we have a nice open source solution coming out for that probably in the next month or so, based on console and Raft consensus algorithms to be able to have services just automatically connect themselves to a service architecture. Distributed tracing, once you have a message that's flowing through a bunch of service nodes in a graph, you have to be able to find who screwed up, which service screwed up, so you need distributed tracing. A service-oriented architecture, a way more complex dev and staging environment setup, which is absolutely worth investing in. Service coordination and deployment, there's some great tooling out there now. We use Mesos right now a lot. We're looking very seriously at Kubernetes from Google because it can do a lot more. And finally, service contracts. I'll digress very quickly here. I was at a talk given by Werner Vogels from Amazon, and he was talking about service, this same kind of talk except at Amazon, so times a million. And at one point in their history, they had thousands and thousands of services in production. So my simple question to him was, how do you keep track of what there is? And his answer was, you don't. It's chaos, like life. I thought, yeah, that's why you're the CTO. But they have this really powerful notion of service contracts where you need to protect any one service from being beaten up too heavily by another service. So you set up this system where any service needs to register itself with a service it will consume and say, I expect to need this many calls per second over time. And as soon as that service goes over that, or as soon as you enter a failure state, you start blowing away all the services that haven't signed up for a contract with you, and then you try to protect all the ones that are good citizens. It's a model they use at Amazon, and it just makes perfect sense. That's it.